to be alive in this land of ours. Good to drive in this land of ours.
Hello, Canada hockey fans in the United States.
Welcome to Hockey Time Machine, everyone. I'm Glenn Dreyfus. Our guest tonight, Brian McFarlane, was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2020. And a quarter century earlier, Dick Irvin welcomed Brian into the Hockey Hall of Fame.
It's just a thrill for me to talk about him tonight here. He was the fellow who hired me in the business, which proves he's not perfect, I can tell you that right now. And he's one of the personalities in the journalism business who really took a journalistic approach to the broadcasting of hockey, perhaps one of the first of us who did that. In fact, he was so honest and journalistic at one point that a certain owner of a certain hockey team based at Maple Leaf Gardens wouldn't let him back in the building for a while. And to many people, that alone could have earned his way into the Hockey Hall of Fame. Our first inductee, my very good friend and a great broadcaster, Brian McFarlane.
Brian McFarlane grew up playing the game of hockey. 3 years of Junior A, followed by an All-American career at St. Lawrence University, preceded his jump to the broadcasting world. His first experience in television was in 1955. A career was launched.
So, let's talk about Bobby Hull and that dramatic series in front of Johnny Bauer there. Perhaps we can look at it back on our slow-motion videotape and just see what happened.
For the next 40 years, the enigmatic McFarlane would provide insight and knowledge to all who watched. His name became synonymous with Hockey Night in Canada, and for 27 years, his voice graced millions of Canadian homes every Saturday nights.
Now, if you only know Brian as a broadcaster or a player, well, you don't know the half of it. Brian has been a singer, a poet, and more recently, a painter. He's been a family man in gasoline commercials, modeled long underwear too, I think. And if you were on defense in an old-timers game and didn't mind your gap, Brian might have skated past you on the way to a spectacular goal. So welcome to Hockey Time Machine, the Renaissance man, Brian McFarlane. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well, Glenn. A lot of memories there, a lot of sights and sounds of Hockey Night in Canada. And I'm delighted to be with you tonight. I think we're going to have some fun here.
Well, I certainly hope so. Brian has called himself a word collector. Recently, he gathered several thousand choice ones for his just published memoir, Hell of a Life in Hockey. Now, I read it cover to cover. Well, actually, I read the digital version, so it didn't have a cover, but it's a warm, wonderful, and funny page-turner about a well-lived life and all the interesting people he's rubbed shoulders with. We've picked some morsels out of Brian's memoir, and what I'd like to do is break our talk into three sections. First, the hockey figures that you write about. Second, your broadcasting career. And third, about you personally. So let's dive right in. Bobby Hull, playing in the WHA, spots you in a bar, and he's not happy.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. I'm friends with the Hull family. Gary and Lois, Bobby's brother and sister-in-law, are very close friends. Dennis Hull lives not too far from our country place, so I see him from time to time. But the confrontation with Bobby in that bar, let's see, he said to me, after I said to him, "I'm sorry I never got to see you play with that big line in Winnipeg, Bobby." And he was gruff. He said, "You had lots of chances to see me play. I don't want anything to do with you or your wife." And he almost knocked Joan off the bar stool next to him. And he pointed at Ken Danico across the table. Good memory for a name there. And he said, "Ken, I don't want anything to do with these two." Well, I was really surprised. But the next morning, he was all apologetic, and we went out to the show that night. So he can be different one day from the next. But I couldn't understand the anger he was showing. I had better things to do than fly to Winnipeg and see Bobby Hull play hockey, and I guess I told him that. And I had another confrontation when Jean Beliveau and his wife were dining with us in New York, and somebody said, "Oh, Bobby said to us," and he pointed at me, "You guys in the media, you were all over Guy Lafleur. You treated him abysmally." I said, "Bobby, I never treated Guy Lafleur abysmally. Maybe I didn't like his nonstop smoking and maybe the lifestyle he led." And he said, "I suppose you don't like my lifestyle." And for some reason it popped out of me. I said, "Not particularly." And he was really upset with that again. And so Bobby and I have had our differences. And in the book, I hesitated about writing about these differences, but I do feel, and look at what's happened this week in Chicago, I do feel he doesn't deserve to be an ambassador for the Chicago Blackhawks. He's been accused and convicted of mistreating a wife or two. And this was in the papers, it was in the courts. And there are more deserving people who've graduated from the Chicago Blackhawks to be in the role of an ambassador than Bobby Hull. My opinion. I can counter that by saying, remember, you said he signed more autographs and more kids than any player in hockey, and that's true. But still, wife beating is not acceptable. Just as the deeds that happened this week in Chicago or in the past years in Chicago are unacceptable. And the Chicago Blackhawks seem to not care very much or not enough about these incidents. My opinion again.
I really admire you for your honesty and saying that, because there's a memorable line in your book that really spoke to me. To not condemn is to condone. And so it's important for voices like yours to speak up about these things, or they'll never change.
That's true. And there have been a lot of incidents in hockey similar to the one that we're talking about this week. Look at that scandal around Maple Leaf Gardens years ago. I was working there 2 and 3 times a week and had no inkling that there was devastation going on in the basement of that building. And that's a kind of almost a sacred building to Maple Leaf hockey fans. And to think that there was child abuse and assault going on in that basement of the building for a long, long time before it was discovered is really sad and sickening. And there have been other incidents with other teams, and I don't think the NHL has taken enough care to safeguard us against those incidents. And the Blackhawks found out today, I guess it's costly to overlook misdeeds. $2 million fine, people getting, if not dismissed, leaving the building. Yeah, that happens in all sports and in regular life, and it's too bad. It's something we must take care of in our sport, hockey, and we must do it now.
A lot of people would rather that these things get swept under the rug, but in the journalism biz, we like to say that light is the best disinfectant, and these things have to be talked about. And I appreciate that you are.
Okay, Glenn, I think that covers that.
So let's go to another confrontation. Let's go to another confrontation, one that you were not a part of, but that you write about. Arthur Wirtz, owner of the Blackhawks starting in the 50s, had a memorable run-in with none other than John Wayne.
Yeah, well, that's a funny story, and I like those better. Anyway, Mike Keenan is the source for this story. Mike and I both went to St. Lawrence University. He followed me by several years, but he was coaching Chicago, and we were having coffee there one day, and he said, let me tell you what happened. He said, Bill Wirtz came home from a business trip. He owns the Chicago Blackhawks, and he owned the hotel we all stayed in Chicago. Well, he decided to stay at the hotel overnight in his private suite. And he went up there and walked in, and there's a guy sitting on the bed, a bald-headed old fella, and he's watching TV. And Wirtz went on the attack and said, what the hell are you doing in my suite? And the guy said, it's not your suite. The manager gave me this suite. And he said, who the hell are you? And he said, I'm John Wayne. He said, you're not John Wayne. I'd know John Wayne if I saw him. And they started wrestling around the bed, apparently. And John said, just a minute. You say you're the owners of this. Wait a minute. And he reached over and he put a toupee that was on the bedside table, slapped it on his head. And he said, now do you believe me? And Wirtz stepped back and he said, by God, you are John Wayne. Welcome to Chicago, Duke, which was his nickname. A lot of kids wouldn't know that. But I thought it was a rather humorous story, and I like to jot down stories or put them on a tape recorder. And that's what I did that day with Mike Keenan. And I pulled it out years later and used it in a book.
John Wayne wore a toupee. Next, you'll be telling me his real name was Marion Morrison.
Oh, the football star when he was young, Marion Morrison. Glenn, that's very good. You go from nothing to a 10, just like that.
I'll take all the help I can get. By the way, there's another story in the book about a poker game in the same hotel, but I'm going to make our listeners buy the book to get that story. I don't expect you to tell that now.
You don't? I'm glad, because my wife hasn't read that part yet.
and I want her to stay your wife. You know, she's hung around this long.
65 years, yeah.
Mary,
yeah.
70.
Okay.
Nothing's permanent, Glenn. Nothing's permanent.
Yeah. Well, you've come pretty close. You mentioned Jean Beliveau, and I wanted to read what you wrote about Beliveau. Quote, I truly doubt there's any man in any of the world's sports who was more admired and respected. Tell me about Jean Beliveau.
Well, I met him when I was 19, and I faced off at center ice with him in a Memorial Cup playoff game in Ottawa. I'd had the measles for a week, and I was feeling sorry for myself. My legs were like rubber, and the coach said, you watch Beliveau today and don't let him score. Well, at first face-off, it looked like he was a giant. I've seen him in later years and said that first impression was wrong. He's only about 6'1" or maybe, but he looked like 6'8" when I faced off against him. And of course, he took the puck and raced down and ripped a shot at our goalie that almost tore his shoulder pad off. And I said, I'm in real trouble. And I had to spend the rest of that game chasing him around and trying to knock him down unsuccessfully. But he left such an impression on me as a hockey player that day. And later, when I got to know him in person, and I found out he's a greater person than he is a hockey celebrity. He's just a greater person. And if that's possible, I don't know how, but I got to work with him on my Scotiabank hockey promotions. I got to interview him. In Montreal, he was just a god. And in hockey, everybody respected Jean Beliveau. And I wish he'd become our governor general, but circumstances got in the way of that appointment. And when he passed, I guess everybody in Canada, we had a collective cry over the loss of this giant in the game of hockey, Jean Beliveau.
Thank you for that. There have been many famous incidents where Brian McFarlane was there, and one of those was 1976, the Flyers versus the Red Army, when the Soviets subjected to the rough stuff from the Broad Street Bullies and left the ice. So let's take a look at a clip of your interview after they left with the Flyers captain, Bobby Clarke.
What about the pregame quotes attributed to you, Bobby, about hating those SOBs and that sort of thing? Was that an accurate quote?
Yeah, the quote was accurate, Brian, but I didn't really elaborate on what I meant. I wasn't talking about the players personally or anything like that. I was talking about all the crap that goes on before the game. Just like when they walked out, they come in here, they're staying 5 minutes from the Spectrum, they're half an hour late for their lunch with us, and we're sitting there like fools, makes us late for our practice. They come, they tell us the gifts that we got for them, they don't want them. They come in and they say they got one stick for each player and they need sticks. We offer them some sticks, they say our sticks are no good, they don't want them, and they're always doing crazy little things like that, and that's the stuff that I hate about them.
So it makes a big difference playing a touring Soviet team as opposed to the Montreal Canadiens or the Boston Bruins, some of the others.
Well, those other teams got a little class, the Russians don't have.
All right.
You really had to hustle there because you weren't expecting to do that interview at that time.
No, in fact, when they walked off the ice, I was sitting in the crowd and I raced down to the corridor and there was all kinds of commotion going on. Would they come back? Were they going home? All the rest of it. Bob Cole's line was classic. They're going home. They're going home. But Bobby, I admired him because he was the golden boy of the Flyers in that era. And look at the way he would come on camera, no teeth. It didn't bother him at all. And he was really wonderful to work with. And I met him when he was with Team Canada for the first time. And I said, what, this little kid is going to be on Team Canada and shine? And he provided the center ice exploits that were probably better than any line in that tournament. But he kind of grew old and maybe a little weary of things, and maybe as a manager and part owner or whatever, he wasn't quite as exciting as he was as a player.
Let's talk about the night that you were a party crasher, the night the Leafs won their last Stanley Cup in 1967.
My wife, you just saw on camera a few minutes ago, we may be, if we live long enough, and I'm 90, she's approaching it, we may be the oldest couple ever to see the Leafs win a Stanley Cup, the oldest living couple, if we live long enough. There must have been younger people at the game that night, and they may surface someday, but that's our goal in life. I guess if we live to 116, we'll have a pretty good chance of being that. Anyway, I like to set goals in my life. I always wanted to be with hockey. I wanted to be a broadcaster. I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to paint one picture just to prove I could do it and sell it, and I've done that. I wanted to write a book because my dad was the writer in the family. My sister's the writer. My daughter's a writer. I'm the fourth best writer in my family, but I've written more books than they have.
Okay, but what about working your way into Stafford Smythe's house without an invitation?
I'm getting old and I forgot the beginning of the story. But yes, the series was over. There are the Leafs all celebrating this big one, winning the Stanley Cup, the team they said would never win it. They were far too old. They beat the Canadiens in 6 games at Maple Leaf Gardens. And you'll recall that George Armstrong scored the empty net goal that cemented it. And what to do now? Well, we went to our kitchen table with a friend from the CBC. I said, let's crash the party. They'll never wait to get invited by the Leafs. You'll never get to a party or a parade. So we got in a car. I said, I don't even know where Stafford Smythe lives. But the CBC guy had contacts, and he said, I found out where he lives. And we drove over there. We walked in the front door. Nobody stopped us. The Stanley Cup was there. There was liquid in it. We sipped from it. And there was Eddie Shack dancing away with a perspiration dripping off his nose. Gary Smith, the sub-goalie, walked in with a Hollywood star that's an amazing looking girl, like Marilyn Monroe lookalike. Let's use that. He walked in with this lady with cleavage down pretty far. And we had a pretty good time. We stayed an hour, took another sip from the Stanley Cup, and went home. And nobody bothered us. We were kind of welcome, as it turned out.
Staying with the Leafs, do you recall Johnny Bower's amazing Technicolor automobile, the one that got the kind of unusual paint job?
Oh, I remember so much about Johnny Bower, and I loved that man. Everybody loved Johnny Bower. How could you go through life and not love Johnny Bower? Anyway, he went to training camp one year, and he was always nervous that he'd be sent down to the minors again. So somebody said, get your wife's car painted. And he said, oh, yes, I better do that. And Punt came over and heard this, and he said, I know a guy in Peterborough here who'll paint that for you. It'll be cheap. And Johnny loved that word, cheap. So he left the keys to the car with Imlach. And when he came back the next day, and they said, Mr. Bower, your car is ready. It's sitting right over there. And he said, I don't see it. I see that god-awful one over. Well, they'd taken Bower's car and painted it purple and orange and red and blue and tan, every color in the spectrum. And he had to drive it around Peterborough with George Armstrong as his passenger. And every time they stopped at a bus stop and there were people waiting, Army would lean out the window and say, this is Johnny Bower's car, folks. Do you like the colors? And Johnny raced home with the car and told his wife what had happened. And she said, you take that right back and get Mr. Imlach to paint that the way I sent you off in it last week. So he did that, and Imlach was a good sport and had it repainted, and Johnny felt a lot better after that. Good joke, though.
Now, I want to alert our audience that the next story we're going to discuss is R-rated. So 17 and over now, about Mike Walton, who played 12 seasons, mostly for Toronto, Boston, and Vancouver. But you write that one night at dinner, he had a most unusual dinner date. And do you need me to go further, or can you take it from here?
Oh, I take it from here, and I think the 17-year-olds will be quite comfortable with this one. Anyway, the Leafs were in Los Angeles, and they decided to go to this posh restaurant for a good meal. And Mike Walton bought a blow-up doll from a street vendor, I guess, and he blew it up, and he took the young blow-up doll lady as his guest for the evening. And they went into this restaurant, and they had 4 chairs. They brought another chair over, and she sat in that, kind of wobbly, I guess. And he talked to her throughout the meal, and how's your wine? And when she didn't add it, what's the matter with the wine? Why don't you drink your wine? And he gave her a little push or a shove or whatever, and she almost fell off the chair. But people were looking now and staring, and then the music started, and Mike said, would you like to dance? I'll make it up to you. Come on, we'll go have a dance. And he dragged her out on the dance floor where her legs were kind of dragging along, and I guess, and they had a dance, and the other dancers looked over and started smiling and laughing, I guess. But by the time they left, the whole restaurant was in an uproar. And Mike said, I can't figure why they didn't just throw her out or throw us all out, because I guess it got to be entertaining. It sounded entertaining to me. And Mike Walton was that kind of guy. Harry Neal said in the WHA in Minnesota, he looked down the bench one night, and Mike Walton was involved in a fight with one of his own teammates. and they were throwing punches, and the referee came over, and Harry said, "Wait a minute, you can't give them a penalty. They're both on my team." And that was another incident in Mike Walton's career. One night he got fed up with a losing effort in Minnesota. Instead of going to the dressing room, he missed a shot on goal or something, and he just in disgust skated right off the rink, picked up his car keys, took his car, drove down to the local bar, and he was sitting at the bar stool in his skates and full uniform, watching the rest of the game on TV, I guess, because it wasn't over when he left. But that must have caused quite a scene in the bar that night. Mike, why aren't you playing for the North Stars tonight?
Yeah, even his blow-up doll didn't want to sit with him that night.
I guess he dumped her somewhere. Maybe threw her in the trash can at the restaurant. That was another night anyway.
Somebody you have only the greatest respect for was Red Wings great Ted Lindsay. Before partnering on NBC broadcasts, a very jolly seasonal version of Brian McFarlane interviewed Lindsay, who was recently retired. Let's watch.
Little Teddy Lindsay, I remember when I brought you your first pair of skates.
And Santa, I've been trying to catch up with you. Actually, they were too big, and I had an awful time with them.
Well, I thought they were double runners, as I remember. Teddy, you give Santa Claus a scoop now. You tell him if you're planning a comeback.
If I could get 10 years of youth, maybe I might think of it. But right now, all I'm looking for is about 10 inches of snow so I can go up north and go skiing.
Well, I might be able to bring you the snow, Teddy, but the 10 years of youth are gone. I'm afraid for that.
You know, Glenn, I don't think I've ever seen that. I don't remember it. I remember interviewing Gordie Howe as Santa Claus, and he said something, I've had a couple of penalties, but they weren't my fault, Santa. But
You gave Gordie Howe as Santa. The present you gave Gordie Howe was a book written by Bobby Hull.
Oh, I'd forgotten that. That's a pretty good gift, though.
The reason I picked the Ted Lindsay clip out of all of those is because of what you wrote about Ted in your book, quoting, "He moved the game forward at great personal cost." So please talk about that.
Well, Ted Lindsay felt that as a player, he should speak up for the other players back in the 50s. And you know, another fellow that did that was Bob Goldham, and he's never gotten the credit that Lindsay has. But Lindsay pushed hard, so hard, to form a players' association. It wasn't going to be angry or anything, but let's improve the players' situation. And that's what he tried to do. And boy, was he condemned by Jack Adams and the other owners. They couldn't wait to get back at Ted. And Adams traded him to the last place Chicago Blackhawks, called him traitorous and selfish and greedy. And he even produced a contract that he showed to the press saying, see, here's what Ted Lindsay's making. I think it was $25,000 or $30,000 a year. Well, it was a false contract. Ted was making $13,000 a year. And this impressed the press to the point, well, yeah, that's too much. Why would he want to act like he does? Well, they traded him away, and he was a Detroit Red Wing from the heart, from the get-go. He just loved playing in Detroit. But that was the price he had to pay for getting involved with the Players Association. He came back and had one final year with Detroit when Clarence Campbell, the president, said, this is a black mark on hockey. This comeback will never turn out successfully. Well, he did pretty well in his final year. And then the Leafs were going to pick him up if they could. But he said, I'd never play for Punch Imlach and the Leafs, so he retired finally. But he was one of my heroes and is forever one of my heroes. I just loved working with the man. He was so dedicated to hockey and to broadcasting. Whatever he did, he put his whole heart into it. And He loved his glass of wine at night. He would never let me order from the wine list because he knew I wouldn't know one wine from another. But he and Tim Ryan, they knew their wine. So I spent 3 seasons with them, and that was another goal in life. One day, maybe I'll get to order the wine when I'm with Ryan and Lindsay, but it hasn't happened and won't now.
Well, we'll discuss this later, but no wonder those NBC telecasts, you all had such wide grins on your face.
You had wide grins on your face.
Wide grins, was that from the wine the night before?
Oh, maybe. I think if we were grinning all the time, it was because we enjoyed those NBC telecasts so much. And I was having troubles with Hockey Night in Canada. And when I came back from a weekend doing an NBC game, my boss called me in and he said, "I hear you've been saying nice things about NBC." I said, "Well, yeah, we bring our skates. We have a little game before the game of the week. We play the media guys. They give us a new car to drive every year from the sponsor. And we have meals together. We've bonded." He said, "Wait a minute, we're nice too." Oh, yes, of course. I hadn't forgotten that, but it just slipped my mind for a minute. But the 3 best years were obviously the NBC years because of the treatment they gave us.
You described great reverence for the NHL.
Hockey Night had some nice, Glenn, Hockey Night had some nice people too, some really good people. I've got to qualify that. Go ahead.
Okay, you've said it for the record. Nice people on both sides of the broadcasting border.
Absolutely.
You describe great reverence in your book for the hockey players in the NHL of the 1960s. You write about, quote, players whose names and numbers are familiar to millions, barefaced, helmetless men as familiar to us as the mugs of our classmates. Who needs names on jerseys? We knew all those guys.
Yeah, that's true. And they were great people. And Glenn, I can't believe that when I was about 40 years old, Bob Goldham said, "Why don't you come and play with our NHL old-timers?" I said, "Well, I never played pro. I wouldn't qualify to do that." And he said, No, we often need another body. Come out and join us." I spent the next 20 years playing with Normie Ullman and Andy Bathgate. Frank Mahovlich would be on my wing. And when I bobbled a pass from him a couple of times, he came over and he said, "Which team are you playing for, McFarlane?" Deadpan. I got to play with Wally Stanowski, who would go into the dressing room and strip down and come back on the ice in his long johns doing a streak, which was common back in the 50s and 60s, I guess. And he'd streak around the ice with the flap of his underwear flying and then put on a show for the people in Georgetown or Uxbridge or Stouffville or wherever. And he was hilarious. Jackie Hamilton was often my centerman. Now, he played in the NHL at 130 pounds. With us, he was 230 pounds, so he didn't do much back checking. But he told me a tip one day when I was trying to win a face-off, maybe. He said, "You know the way I won face-offs in the NHL from time to time?" He said, "I'd go over to the bench and take a sip of water and hold it in my cheek. And when the puck was dropped, I'd squirt the water in the opposing center's face, just like that, and I'd win the draw." I said, "Well, I never knew that happened, and now I've got another little gem to put in my hockey book that I kept." Should we finish with that?
Elsewhere in the book, you lament, and this is a quote, "Where are the characters?" So my question for you is, has hockey, and in fact all of sports, become too buttoned up, too corporate?
Yes, Glenn. And that may be a good thing. I mean, some of the hijinks the players pulled in my era. Let me cite one. George Morrison played with our old timers. He was playing for Scotty Bowman, of all people, in St. Louis. He was a college guy when people looked down on college players, but he scored 40 goals in college, and he was a really good goal scorer. Anyway, he sat on the bench for Scotty Bowman. Game after game, they go on a West Coast trip. He sits on the bench in Edmonton, Vancouver, and he's sitting on the bench in Los Angeles, but now he's a little hungry, and he said to an usher, "I'll give you my stick after the game if you'll get me a hot dog and a Coke." So the usher rushed off, came back with the drink and the hot dog, and looked at that stick. "I'm going to get that." Well, George was sneaking a bite out of the hot dog when Scotty was looking the other way, and sipping from the drink when Scotty yelled, "Scott Morrison, get out there and kill that penalty." What to do? He said, "I had to come over the boards, and I threw the drink on the floor, but the hot dog, I shoved it down the cuff of my glove so it would disappear." I jumped on the ice, and I'm in front of Rogie Vachon when somebody hit me a hell of a check, and the hot dog went flying up in the air and was spinning, and there's mustard, and Rogie Vachon reached out with his goal stick and scooped it into the net, and there was a whistle, and everybody was sort of stunned, and a line change. And as I skated off the ice, I couldn't dare look at Scotty Bowman because he was trying to figure out what happened out there. How come a hot dog got on the ice in the middle of a St. Louis Blues hockey game? And George never told him, of course, and I don't think Scotty, unless he's watching tonight, which he may well be, he would know that story. You couldn't keep that from Scotty. No, Scotty, I'm sure you'll say that happened. I was there.
Since that's kind of a mic drop moment on the hockey players you've known and loved, let's move to our second section, which is Brian McFarlane, the broadcaster, because hockey fans know you best that way for CBS and NBC in the States, in addition to Hockey Night in Canada. And what I want to play now is an early clip of you with Bill Hewitt discussing a trade.
Brian, naturally, the fans both in Toronto and I guess from coast to coast are interested in the comparison of the trade that was sold off between the Detroit Red Wings and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Would you like to assess the value of it over one period?
No, I wouldn't. Would you? No, I really think it's too early for anybody to assess that trade. You take that first period tonight, Eddie Joyal sparkled out there for the Leafs, and Andy Bathgate had a wonderful chance for the Red Wings. Harris was out there. I know I talked with Sid Abel just before the game, and he said he's very happy with Harris. He wished some of the other boys were playing as well.
Chapter 23 of your book. Chapter 23 is devoted to the Hewitts, Foster and Bill. And right off the bat, you say, quote, "Well, here it comes. The chapter I worry most about." How come?
Well, they're legends. They're icons. They're so famous. Foster particularly was the pioneer in hockey broadcasting, and he was just a voice you listen to every Saturday night across Canada. Bill followed him into the gondola, into the broadcast booth, and I worked mainly with Bill, but I was surprised at some of the things that he said on air. The first game I worked with Bill, and I worry about this because the family might say, well, that's terrible that he would criticize Bill or Foster, but these are kind of funny things. The puck went right along the goal line behind Bauer, but it did not cross the line. It stayed out. And Bill turned to me and he said, "Brian, as you know, any part of that puck on the goal line, it's a goal." Well, I knew it wasn't a goal, but I'm not going to correct him on air, especially my first game. So we go to commercial and I said, "Bill, you made a little mistake there. The puck has to be over the line to count." "No, it doesn't." I said, "Well, Bill, I've got the rule book right here. Let's see. Rule 33C, puck must be over the line to count." And he looked at the book and studied it, and he said, "Well, they've changed that rule." And that was kind of the start of it. He said one night, Brian, the All-Star votes are in. And again, Bobby Orr was a unanimous choice. No, I'm sorry, I've got this reversed. I said, Bill, the All-Star votes are in, and Bobby Orr was a unanimous choice again this year. He said, yeah, right, Brian, almost everybody voted for him. I'm thinking, unanimous? Okay. There were things like that happened. And one little story about Foster. The producer said, on tonight's intermission, we're going to talk about the highlights of the first half of the season. You and Dave Hodge and Foster, I guess, are on there, maybe Bob Golden. And so think about what you'll talk about. And then we were sort of went into a little bit of a rehearsal. Brian, what are you going to talk about? Well, I think Boom Boom Jeffrey on with 30 goals or whatever. And Foster, what's your highlight? He said, I think my radio station going to 50,000 watts. Again, there was silence. And somebody said, well, Foster, couldn't you pick a hockey highlight? Oh, a hockey highlight. Well, okay. And he picked one, but I thought, who would say my radio station's going to 50,000 watts as a highlight of the hockey season? But Foster did. But Foster could do almost whatever he wanted. He had the broadcast rights to Maple Leaf Gardens from the get-go and made a fortune selling rights. I went down there when I first came to Toronto for radio station CFRB, and I did an interview with a tennis star, and I put it on my sportscast that night, and my boss came in the next morning. He said, where'd you get that interview? I said, at Maple Leaf Gardens. Well, you're not allowed to go in there without Foster's permission. I said, I'm not? No. Yeah. So he said, I'll call Foster and straighten it out. You'll be okay. But I didn't even realize Foster had that much clout in the broadcast area.
Well, something else that you apparently weren't aware of, just like the rule about the puck on the goal line changing, they also changed the definition of unanimous, so it didn't always mean everybody. So they changed that too. You just hadn't been told.
Yeah, I guess so. Bill was one reason I hesitated, Bill was such a gentle soul. I think he was a very troubled soul. I think Foster kind of said, you're going to follow me into the broadcast booth. And Bill might have said, I'd rather be a game warden, Dad. I love the outdoors and nature and animals. I think he would have preferred to be the game warden of Ontario. Not the best broadcaster in Hockey Night in Canada. But you just liked Bill. He never took part in meetings. I had 2 meals with him in 17 years of working with him. He never came on the same flight. He never stayed in the same hotel. He just showed up at the arena, and the game, once that siren went at the end of the game, the seat was empty. He was halfway home by then, I'm sure. The rest of us are headed for the bar to have a nice drink of beer or something and get to talk about the 3 stars of the game itself or hockey generally. Bill, no, he didn't do any of that.
Well, let me ask you, can you see the photo we have up now of yourself and Bill?
Yes.
Okay. Am I reading too much into it that you have this wide grin on your face, almost a mischievous smile, while Bill is essentially expressionless and just looking at the ice and only the ice?
Well, that's an interesting interpretation. I think if I'm grinning, it's because I could never believe my good luck to be a color commentator on the hockey telecasts. I saw my first game there when I was about 6 years old. It was a junior game, Wally Stanowski for St. Boniface Seals, starring against Billy Taylor, Oshawa Generals. And it never dawned on me, if I wanted to be at the Gardens, it would be as a player. Well, I knew early on I'd never make it as a player. But to be in there for so many years, in that wonderful place called the Gondola. No bathroom up there. Boy, you'd better do your business before you started up there to do microphone tests an hour before game time. And after 2 periods of overtime, you might have been in serious trouble. The people below you might have, never mind. Anyway,
weren't you told also? Place. Weren't you told don't talk to Bill? He doesn't listen to you anyway.
That's true. Yeah, I had so many do's and don'ts. Don't talk about the fights. Don't get Harold Ballard mad. Don't talk to Bill because he never responds anyway. Those were some of the do's and don'ts. The other was Brian, my first game. Don't speak more than 6 times a period. That'll be a nice balance with you and Bill. No, I'm sorry. It was 3 times a period. And I said, what if 6 goals are scored in the first period? Well, speak about 3 of them. I broke that edict in the first 10 minutes of my career there, I think.
Well, and also thank you for the segue because you mentioned Harold Ballard. And there's an incident, a famous one, that you deserve, I think, an enormous amount of credit for. The background is Toronto captain Darryl Sittler reaches his breaking point with Leafs management and with the owner, Harold Ballard, in 1982. And you come to Sittler's defense. And you deserve enormous credit, not just because of the eventual harm it did to your career, but as you point out in the book, Sittler took a leave of absence under great emotional distress. And so I'd like you to contrast the management and media reaction at the time with Sittler and compare that to the understanding, the greater understanding shown earlier this year when Carey Price made a very similar announcement.
Yes. Well, things have changed dramatically since those days, but Sittler didn't show up for a game in Minnesota, and everybody was upset. Mike Nicoluk was upset, and Jerry McNamara was upset. Harold Ballard was upset. This guy should have shown up, and I knew that he was going through a long period of stress and consulting professionals, and I figured every guy needs a sick day off every once in a while, even team captains. So I said, well, we want you to talk about it during the intermission with Danny Gallivan and Dave Hodge, I guess. I said, wait a minute, I'm going to be in serious trouble there if I defend Sittler, and I'd rather defend him than chastise him. Well, we could tape it, and if you say something inflammatory, we could edit it maybe. I said, well, that's a good thought, but they decided, I guess, let's try to do it live, and maybe we could scrap the tape if it's too inflammatory. So anyway, I stumbled through some response trying to defend Sittler, and not from Ballard so much as from Imlach. And the whole world exploded after the game. I was told by Danny Gallivan, I think you're on the flight back home, he said, I knew you were in trouble as soon as you started talking about Sittler. And he said, I took the mealy mouth way and said, well, why didn't they do something else? But Danny and I had a fun talk about it. And when I got home, he said, take the phone off the hook. Well, it was ringing when I got there, and you're not working here anymore. So I was fired. But to his credit, and Dick Beddoes and Dave Hodge went to Ballard and probably told them I was an idiot and didn't know what I was saying or didn't understand whatever they said to him. It got me back to temporarily on the show, but I wasn't allowed in the gondola for further color commentary. And I had to go out to Winnipeg I didn't have to, but I went to Winnipeg for 4 years and enjoyed doing games there, except for the travel. Then 4 years in Montreal, which is another hockey heaven with winning teams. So it worked out pretty well the last 8 years of my career. And I only got one chance back in the Garden to say anything. And that was on Hall of Fame night when Bill Torrey, my good friend from St. Lawrence University, went in the hall with me, and we were invited as special guests in the gondola. So it all worked out.
Well, for whatever it's worth, let me say bravo, because you were way ahead of your time in recognizing that mental health needs to be recognized and respected just as much as physical health.
Well, you're right, Glenn, and I'm sure I know of certain players. I know Ronnie Ellis fought depression all his NHL career, and he had more courage than I do because he was a celebrity far greater than I was, and he portrayed his health problems, mental health problems, in a book and to people and in interviews. And he also stuttered badly when he was a child and a Marley. And when I invited him on a show as a junior and at CFDO TV, and he gladly came out and was a guest. And I know that it made him nervous that he was going to misspeak or stutter a little bit. Gee, the President of the United States does that from time to time. But mental issues, emotional issues back in those days were covered up or not discussed, or there was some shame attached to being depressed, for example. Well, how many goaltenders would be depressed if Guy Lafleur was shooting at you every night?
All of them. Brian, as you well know, what's all the rage with TV hockey broadcasts these days is being inside the glass. But Brian McFarlane was once on the ice. Let's take a look.
A high rising shot by Rolf caught Barry Ashby right in the face. We're going downstairs now to Brian McFarlane, who was right out there on the ice.
I talked to the linesman, and Barry Ashby was hit just on the eyelid, just above the right eye. It is a bad gash, according to the officials. Matt, you were there. Could you describe it?
Well, it's just above the eyelid, between the eyelid and the eyebrow.
Well, there's a lot of blood, and they've moved quickly to get Barry Ashby off the ice on this stretcher.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
You know, I read in the paper the next morning, flying back from Philadelphia, McFarlane told stay off the ice. I said, well, nobody's talked to me about that. I haven't heard from anybody. But I ran into Clarence Campbell, the league president, a week later in the same building, Madison Square Garden. And he was coming from the press room. I was walking down a corridor. He walked by. I said, hello, Mr. Campbell. Hello, Brian. He walked about 10 paces and he said, oh, Brian. I stopped. He said, what? He said, stay off the ice. Yes, sir. And I kind of laughed because it was an afterthought. But I was standing there with a microphone. The gate opened up. The gurney goes out on the ice. Two people, a doctor. I just stepped out on the ice impulsively. And I'll never forget Brad Park on the Ranger bench. He was the closest guy to me. He said, Brian, you're not supposed to be out here. I said, Brad, I know, but I'm not stopping now. And I kept on going and talked to Matt Pavlich. But while it was playing just now, a great deal of sadness came over me because Barry Ashby was such a class guy. I didn't know him well, but I know that all the Flyers loved their team leader. And that accident was followed by leukemia and followed by an early death. And I think, of all people to be involved with a terrible injury like he suffered that day, Barry Ashby would be the last guy you'd want to suffer from that. And then the follow-up tragedy. There was another incident with their goaltender, Pelle Lindbergh, who died in an auto crash years later. Those things are something you live with and you're part of to a degree, and you feel such sadness when good hockey people are gone.
Well said. We should also mention that the first voice you heard in that Ashby clip was your NBC broadcast partner, Tim Ryan, who is watching tonight and made a comment in the chat. So shout out to Tim Ryan.
Well, Glenn, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because while it was playing, I said to myself, I'm going to mention Tim when we come out of this, and I started with something else. But I think Tim was really, he was always accused of being looking too young in his career when we first started out in Toronto here on radio at CFRB and at CFDO. And Tim was awfully young looking, but he was very skilled as a broadcaster. We did track meets together. He was ambitious. When the league doubled in size, he sent letters out. He got good broadcasting jobs. He liked the city lights. I liked the country life. So we had that difference. But we bonded with Ted Lindsay. We both have the greatest admiration for Ted, our broadcast partner. And I admire what Tim has done with his career and his life. And he had some tragedies in his life too, which I won't go into without his permission. But I just want him to know that there was a lot of love around when we were working together, a lot of admiration, a lot of respect.
Tim Ryan, in my mind, is one of the great underappreciated talents of sports broadcasting. In baseball, they talk about 5-tool players who can field and throw and hit for power. Well, Tim was able to do hockey and football and Olympic sports, and was able to be both a journalist and entertaining on all of those. And that's something, and I've left out a whole lot of sports he did. You and he did minor league baseball, for goodness sake.
Yeah, we got about $3.60 mileage for doing the baseball. They didn't have a sponsor, but our boss said, if we ever get a sponsor, we'll be able to pay you a fee, but you can have all the hot dogs you want down at the ballpark. You're going to be up on the roof doing the broadcast. And Tim and I were doing a Toronto Maple Leaf AAA game one day when we smelled smoke, and there was a fire in the stadium somewhere, and it was, we didn't know, maybe spreading up to the roof where we were ensconced. And we kept looking over our shoulder to see if the fire rigs are coming to put the fire out, whether we should sign off and flee for our lives, or whether we should keep broadcasting. And there'd be another hit and a walk and a pitch, and we'd call it and keep looking over our shoulder, and seemingly somebody took control of it. But we had a few anxious moments that day. Tim will be laughing now. He'll say, I remember that.
Here's another funny interview you did with NBC with a Bernie Perrant fan at the Spectrum. Let's take a look.
Are you afraid of getting hit by a puck? No, I'm just here for Bernie. He's my favorite player. He's doing great in the series, and that's why I'm helping him.
Now you got this glass protecting you too. Let's see what you look like underneath that mask.
Oh man, Bernie!
Isn't he a handsome devil? Back up to you, Tim.
Clearly you were having fun, and I think that is why you had such strong connection with the audience all those years. Now that goes all the way back to your days at CFCF in Montreal. So what were some of your favorite stunts that you remember from your time doing local sports in Montreal?
Well, I wasn't very happy in Montreal, so I can't think of a whole lot of highlights there. Maybe you could prompt me, but I know that the best thing I did there was hire Dick Irvin as my assistant. I was a one-man sports show or sports department, and when I asked for help, they said, "Oh my goodness, that would cost us money to bring in somebody." I had a fellow out west in mind, thought he might fit the bill, and they said, "If we give you an assistant, it has to be somebody local, somebody who lives in town." They were thinking of the budget. I said, "Well, Dick Irvin was on my show last week. He'd be pretty good. He sounded good. He's working at the Forum. His father's a famous coach and all this." And they said, "Well, hire him then, but offer him $75 a week." I said, "Oh, he's got a better job than that. He's making more money than that. He'd have to give up a salary of $130 a week maybe to come to work." And they said, "Well, that's it. We can't afford any more." So I said, "I can't do it. If you're going to hire him, you do it." So they said, send him along. So Dick went in to see them, and he came out rather grim-faced, and he said, I thought the glamorous world of television paid a little bit more than what I've been offered, $75 a week. And I said, Dick, why don't you take it for 6 months, see how it goes? Maybe things will work. And he said, well, it's a good thing I'm living at home and I'm still single. And that's one reason he got into television. And look at the career, Hall of Fame career. And I started him on the road.
So you're an agent too.
Yeah, but there were no fees.
All right, another clip, and maybe you can explain this one, or maybe there is no explanation for it. But let's take a look. It's you with comedian Marty Allen.
Come in here, pal. What is your name again?
Punchy Hemlock.
Punchy or Paunchy?
Oh, no, I'm the one with the hair.
Oh, that's right. No relative to our coach, Punch Imlach.
No, listen.
You play hockey, do you?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
What do you call your team?
I can't use those words. I can't use those words on television.
What in the wide world of sports is going on there?
That's a terrible clip. I'm embarrassed about that. Those guys had no real talent. I don't know. When somebody said, I think it was Paul Patska is responsible for this. I'm not
yes.
on him. He said to me once, I have a clip of you at home with these comedians from Hollywood. I said, I don't even remember them. Did I do a thing with it? Yes, you did. And now you've shown the whole world probably a few awkward home moments in my career. But it's okay.
Maybe you'll like this next one better. You're doing coverage of Rendezvous 87, the series between the Soviets and NHL All-Stars. So, of course, where else would you go for insight than to the Second City Comedy Club in Toronto? Hang on.
How do the NHL players feel about Rendezvous 87?
How do the NHL players feel about Rendezvous 87?
Well, personally, I have other projects that I'm working on, like a sequel to my hockey video called Hockey Hairstyles My Way.
The NHL are indeed very interested.
Oh, that's good news. We're all looking forward to the big event in Quebec City.
Oh, another silly spoof. No wonder my boss said we're not going to play the second section of that. I went to Second City and Myers, Joan Myers.
Mike Myers.
Mike Myers.
Okay. He did a really funny spot, and I brought it back, and my boss said, well, that's not funny. And here he was, a big star in Saturday Night Live, I guess, or in New York and movies. And I said, well, that the boss doesn't know much about show business, I guess. It's like when I wrote the Eddie Shack song, and I wanted to have the band, 4 guys in a band like the Beatles, all wearing number 23, Shaq's number, on the ice, and lip syncing the song, Clear the Track, Here Comes Shaq. And it was scuttled at the last minute. My boss said, we don't want you making money from royalties on that song. So we're not gonna have the number 23 on anybody's shirt, and we're not gonna do this or that. But we did get the song on somehow, and Shaq then harassed me for the next 30 years. Where are my royalties for that song? I said, well, you don't get any royalties, Eddie, because you told me I could go ahead and write the song. And I can remember your words. I don't give a what you do. And so you don't get any royals. He said, well, Johnny Bauer's making 3 cents a record from singing Honky the Goose. I said, yeah, he's singing the song. You never sang Clear the Track, but you pretended you did in interviews. I heard you on the air pretending you were a singer. So anyway, we had a dispute, and it ended in a confrontation at the airport around the carousel when I called him over because he'd harassed me all the way out on the flight. And all the bad words I'd ever heard in a hockey dressing room just flowed out of me and into his face. And I felt so much better about it on the trip home.
Since you talked about your bosses, if there was one constant in your broadcast career, now this is how you say it in the book, quote, was I ever going to find a boss I respected? Now, in broadcasting, maybe this goes for all occupations, but as a wise sage now, Brian, how is it that so many clueless people get to be in so many important jobs?
Well, maybe it's the Peter principle. I can't answer that question, but I will say that Scotty Connell, now deceased, far too young, was my favorite boss. There were others that really helped my career. Ralph Mellenby should be mentioned. He was a good boss, but he left us too soon to go to the Olympics and do. I wished he'd stayed with Hockey Night a lot longer. There weren't few. There were. I see. I didn't work for the CBC. The rights were owned by an advertising agency, McLaren Advertising. So they really didn't have any broadcasters in their group. They had bean counters and creative guys, I guess. But if I'd been working for a network, they would have had a sports department with some knowledgeable sports guys running the show. And that never happened to me until NBC and CBS, but that was back in 1960, and it was only for one season, and I never really got established there. But good bosses are very important. I don't think I'd be a very good boss. I'm not really organized enough, but I know one when I see one.
And when you don't, and if you read A Hell of a Life in Hockey, there's a lot of don't. So Tim Ryan is in the chat saying, I knew you would credit Scotty Connell to that question. You know, you and I agree he was the best.
Yes, Tim. Oh, I knew Tim would say that, and Ted Lindsay too. Now, he had Jack Adams as a boss in hockey, and I think when he joined NBC and found out that Scotty Connell was going to be his boss, he probably said, wow, these guys are neat.
Let's discuss what was your real wheelhouse, which was the intermission interview. And I want to show an example. You and Paul Morris going up the heights into
I remember
the scoreboard at Maple Leaf Gardens.
I feel like Phineas Fogg beginning that trip around the world, and we're coming very close now to the interior of this clock, which was made how many years ago, Paul?
It's about 9 years ago now. We're not swaying too much here.
And how far are we off the ice surface?
28 feet. The bottom of the clock is 28 feet from the surface of the ice. And the first job we would do normally on a hockey day would be to change any bulbs that might be out.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was made in the gardens, that clock. They had people that were really clever and skilled, and they developed their own overhead clock. And I was foolish enough to go up and see what was inside.
Actually, you had a real talent for the intermission segments. Did you enjoy doing them as much as it looked like you enjoyed them?
Yes, I did. We had Halloween. They were inexpensive. There was a low budget on them, and I formed a little company and produced some with a cameraman I knew. But we never seemed to have much money to do extensive editing or fixing them up to look a little better. One I missed that really bothered me. Carl Brewer got to be a good friend, and he told me we're going to have a meeting at the hotel near the airport in Toronto Tuesday night. You better be there. So I show up with my tape recorder, and there's no other media guy in the room. There's Bobby Hull and Gordie Howe and Andy Bathgate and Eddie Shack and his wife and all these celebrities in the hockey world. And they were a couple of lawyers, and they were going to sue the NHL, I guess, or the insurance company for something like $40 million that was owing to the players. And even Clarence Campbell had said, yes, the players are owed this money. It doesn't belong to the owners, but they were using the money. And Carl Brewer, the mischief. A little guy did some digging and found out all these facts and hired these lawyers at his own expense. I always admired Carl for this. And then I got a chance to tape all the proceedings, how they're going to proceed and get legal advice, and they're going to sue and this and that. And I said, oh, and Alan Eagleson was the culprit. They were all coming down on Al Eagleson. And I said to my boss, I phoned him right after, and I said, I've got a great feature for Saturday night. It's all about this lawsuit, and it's going to be huge. And all we have to do is get Eagleson to rebut it or reply, give the other side, and we've got a dandy feature. Well, he had told me I was slated to go to Saskatoon to do some intermission stuff, and it was $1,000 fee I was getting at the time. So he said, don't go to Saskatoon. We'll huddle over this story and see what we do. Well, the week went slowly by, and suddenly I called and said, what's happening? He said, it's too hot to handle. We just can't put that on. The league will get mad at us, whatever. I said, well, okay, well, you've sent Ron McLean to do the Saskatoon feature. What about the fee I lost for bringing you this story and you sitting on it? And he said, well, Ron did the show, so he gets the fee. So I lost $1,000 fee by being in my intrepid reporter suit and thinking I had a great interview and a great feature for Saturday night. And in the book, the editor cut off the end of it. The troubles I'm just telling you about now don't appear in the article. And I said, when I proofread the book, how come I missed that? Because it seemed to me important at the time. I don't think this makes any sense.
There's a part that's not in the book that's part of the story?
Yeah. Well, I take too long to tell my stories. I know that. And that
well, what's the part that isn't in the book?
Well, maybe there'll be another book. I always keep stuff by, you know. I've got about 8 books in my computer.
Remember, I was talking a couple of minutes ago about the corporate bosses who don't have your back. Well,
yes.
There's a good example.
Yes.
And
good example. That's a good
yeah.
example.
Yeah.
And you call that chapter.
How about the one when I was starting out in Schenectady, and my boss, I started a softball team, the WRGB Campbells or something, I don't know. And we played a few games, and we got a little crowd coming to see us. And I asked my boss, Ted Bond, his name was, Ted, would you like to play on our softball team? Because he was a celebrity in the town. He did the late news on our telecast. And he said, no, I don't want any part of that stuff. I'm not into that. So we're playing a game one night, and who drives up along the third base line but my boss in a big shiny Cadillac? He gets out in his 3-piece suit, walks right across the infield. All play stops. He turns to the crowd and said, hi, folks, I'm Ted Bond. They said, we know you, Ted. It's good to see you. Why don't you take a bat? He said, okay. And he picked up a bat, took off his jacket. I had to make a quick decision. I'd only been there a few weeks or months. I said, Ted, why don't you wait a while? You said you had no interest in this ball stuff before. These guys have been practicing. Maybe I could work you in the next couple of innings. He got very angry. He turned to the crowd and he said, the young sports guy here doesn't want me to play, folks, so I'm out of here. And he got in his caddy and drove away. And I came home and I said to Joan, my wife, I think I just lost my job tonight over a stupid softball game. But the next week he got fired, and he'd been there for years as the big time sport newscaster. And I said, whoa, I breathed a sigh of relief. And when Punch Imlach wanted me fired in '69 after Quinn hit Orr, and I described that, and he got all upset. They lost 10-0. He wanted me fired. And we finished the series, and I got out of the building because I didn't want to face Imlach. He would have me on the over the coals. So we're driving home, and I heard on the radio, Punch Imlach was just fired as general manager of the Leafs tonight. I said to my wife, we escaped again. Another boss gets fired, and I survived.
Brian McFarlane, the Houdini of broadcasting. I want to play one more clip, even though it's not a hockey clip, because it's amazing. It's with early baseball immortal Ty Cobb. And as you and the Georgia Peach are talking, you almost get run over by an automobile. So take a look.
Ty, I saw you over there talking to Stan Musial. Were you giving him a few tips on how to play baseball?
No, I can't give anyone any tips. Stan he's got it, and he doesn't need anybody. We were just fanning about kidding.
Okay, thank you very much for being with us on Sports Final, Ty Cobb.
I feel very much honored to be here.
Yeah, we're hit and run driver right there. But you know, that same day, Glenn, Stan Musial was one of my idols in baseball, and he was there. And I interviewed him, and when I finished, the cameraman said the film didn't go through properly. We didn't get the interview. Now he's way over there at second base. I walked over and I said, Mr. Musial, I hate to tell you this, but I'm a young sportscaster starting out, and I didn't get your interview, but the cameraman assures me it's ready to go again. Would you mind doing it a second time? And he put his arm on my shoulder and said, let's get it right this time. And we went over and we did it a second time, and we didn't get it right. He's now in the outfield warming up for the ball game, the Hall of Fame game. And I went out into the field, and I said, Mr. Musial, I hate to tell you this, we didn't get it the second time. Would you mind awfully coming back when you've got a moment? And he said, let's go back and we'll do it a third time and hope that it turns out okay. And it did, but I don't have it. I have Ty Cobb. I'd love to have Stan Musial.
That is a great story. And the kicker is, the next day, the Cardinals fired Stan Musial.
No, I hope not.
Oh, okay. No, I made that up, but I thought that's how it all ended with people you come in contact with. I'm going to be fired tomorrow.
No, but I tell you what, Glenn, I like to be nice to young people starting out because I remember my beginnings. And when they tell me sometimes, well, that was nice of you to meet my son and talk to him about broadcasting or wherever, I said, let me tell you about Stan Musial. You tell how nice he was, because he was great.
Indeed. In the few moments that we have left, and this has been wonderful, but I want to go over some of the high points in the life of Brian McFarlane that we haven't discussed already. And the first one is, please tell me and the audience, who is Franklin W. Dixon?
Franklin W. Dixon is a pen name for the first author of the Hardy Boys books back in 1926. My dad got the job as the original Franklin W. Dixon. He got $100 a book to write a Hardy Boys book, and he wrote 21 of them over the next 20 years. He got no royalties, and they sold 80 to 100 million copies, probably a million every year are still sold. He never complained. He said, I knew what the deal was. If I hadn't done it, it was hack writing. Anybody else could have done it. I said, no, they couldn't, Dad. You did a wonderful thing. You got millions of kids hooked on reading. They went from the Hardy Boys to better books, maybe. And I think somehow I got the bug to write my own series of books. And I'm always pleased when somebody said, you know, you started me on reading about hockey, and now I've got a collection of hockey books that's famous. But my dad was an amazing man. He was small. He was jockey-sized. He was shy. Everything was going on in his head. All these stories. He wrote great hockey fiction. He went to the National Film Board when they were first born, making movies in Canada. He was nominated for an Academy Award over a fishing film he wrote. He went to Hollywood and wrote for Bonanza briefly, worked with Lauren Green and others out there just to prove he could do it, like I do in my life, I guess. I was immensely proud of him. My daughter, his daughter Nora, my sister, is a skilled writer of novels living in Lewiston, New York. We're dearly in love with each other and compare notes almost every day. I have a wonderful family. My wife of 65 years. We met the very first day of college at St. Lawrence University, and we've been there. We are Joan Pellet from Hillsdale, New Jersey. She'd never seen a hockey game, and now she knows more about the game than I do. We have four great grandkids now. And Connor was born. He may be another Connor McDavid. Wouldn't that be something? Oh boy!
Well, I want to ask you about Joan. A few years ago, Joan went to the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert, the one with the scorching heat and the nighttime chill and the always sandstorms, and she did it at the age of 81. That is some firecracker you married.
Well, she is. She has a temper. Yeah, she's a firecracker. And she went out there with my daughter and her husband and stayed and slept in a pup tent and got up. And what you don't know is she taught 30-year-olds fitness exercises in the morning because she has a degree in fitness that she got when she went back to college at age 44 to get the degree. And she's the best fisherman I've ever met. That's probably why we married. We like trout fishing so much.
When is she writing her book?
Oh, I hope she doesn't write her book because I'll be in it. And I want me to be in my books and her to be in my books. I don't want to be in her book.
Can you bring Joan in for a second to say hello?
No.
Sure.
No.
She's a good sport.
No.
Come on in.
No.
And she had a hole-in-one in golf. I've never had that.
Oh, and now
I could run faster than he could.
Oh, she was a good athlete. You know, Glenn, in her era, the girls who were really talented.
She has to scooch in towards you a little bit.
The girls who were really talented in sports never got a chance. There were no girls' teams. She would have been excellent on track and field or maybe the wrestling. I don't know.
Well, Joan, you need to tell us the story. You got your hubby a broadcasting gig in Toronto.
I did.
Well, tell us.
We just moved up from the States where he was in WRGB, Schenectady, New York, and decided that he wanted to come back to Canada to do hockey. And so we were in bad shape. We didn't have any money, and we were living in an apartment, and lo and behold, who moved downstairs but the Retzlaffs? And he was in the CBC as a sports director, and I used to do the laundry down in the basement with his wife. And so when I heard that he was sports director at CBC, I said to her, my husband's a sportcaster and he's looking for a job. We just moved here and maybe you could talk to him. And she did. And he got an interview and
he let me do a sportscast Monday night, $50. And I called all the radio stations in town, and CFRB, the top station, called and offered me a job the next week.
Wow.
Thanks to her.
Way to go, Joan.
Oh, you know what he wanted to do? He said, because we were down to like $5. We couldn't pay the rent. We had a new baby. We didn't know what we were going to do. He said, okay, Joan, I'm going to take a sales job and I'm going to sell pots and pans. I said, you are not selling pots and pans. You're a sports director, sports person. No. So that's the way. I put my foot down, said, there's no way you're selling pots and pans.
But Mike Ilitch sold pots and pans, and he got to own Detroit, the Red Wings. That's how he started.
Well, but he doesn't have Joan.
No, that's true. No.
So well done. So we have one guest to bring in, and thank you, Joan. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. You were interviewed some 25 years ago by the other fellow who hosts Hockey Time Machine, TVO's Steve Paikin. And at the end of the programs he hosts, he is kind enough to bring me on for a couple of minutes, and now I get to return the favor. So here is Steve, and I want to play just a moment of a clip from your interview from the mid-90s.
Hour 2 of Double Play for Friday morning. I'm Bruce Dobingham from CBC News World. He's Steve Bacon from TV Ontario.
This guy's my hero. Do you know this? This guy, I'm not kidding you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but he just walked in.
This not
he just walked in and I got excited. I'm sorry, Brian. I don't want to date you, but I really do feel an obligation.
You just want to hold his hand?
But, no. But I have I want our listeners to know that one of the reasons I'm in broadcasting today is because of you. I remember watching you on the weekend afternoon broadcasts and for Hockey Night in Canada for so many years, and you were one of my guys.
Oh, you've made my whole week, Steve. That's wonderful.
I'm sorry to be mushy about that.
Steve, the floor is yours.
I'm just very happy to be able to experience this moment with Brian. I think I summed it up pretty well 25 years ago in that radio broadcast when I said that, it's absolutely true. I think one of the reasons I've ended up doing what I'm doing is because of Brian McFarlane. I did watch him a great deal when he did the Game of the Week. And I read most of your dad's Hardy Boy books as well. And you were one of those people who had a tremendous influence on me, if I can say this, growing up. So I'm happy to come crash your little party at the end here, Brian.
Well, I'm going to return the compliment, Steve, because I've always admired your work. And I'm so glad at times I get a chance to see somebody. I want to tell them how much I respect them. That's you in this case, but I'm distressed as I'm 90 years old. I know I'm not going to meet certain people in time to tell them how much I appreciate them. And so I'm advising anybody who's aging, say it now, okay? And mean it.
Do you know what? That's it. What you just said is very profound. And I took your advice, having not even heard it yet, but probably you were intuiting it to me. I'm sure you met or knew former Ontario Premier Bill Davis during the course of your life. And I had the great fortune to spend a lot of time with him in his latter years. And I wrote a book about him. And he just died this past August at 92. And I called him on his birthday, which was in July. And I knew it would be the last time I spoke to him because I could hear it in his voice that he wouldn't be around for much longer. And I told him how much he meant to me. And I've never said that to a politician before. So your advice is spot on. And everybody watching or listening to this tonight should listen to Brian McFarlane because he is wise and he offers good advice.
And keep listening to Steve Bacon because he's one of our best.
You are too kind, sir. Anyway, Glenn, I pass it back to you. Thank you for letting me crash your party. But this is a really great moment. Brian, I'm so glad you're still going at it at 90. You're a great example for the rest of us to just keep on keeping on.
Well, I may have 10 minutes or 10 years left, Steve, and I'm thinking maybe the latter, because Joan's going to live till 116, and well, I can't do the math anymore, but it looks like we're going to do that.
Yep.
Good stuff.
Thank you, Steve. Brian, they would not let me hear the end of it if I didn't mention before we said goodbye your best friend other than Joan, which is Peter Puck. Now, Peter's entire career of intermission segments added together lasted something like 27 minutes. So how is it, do you think, that his name a half century later is still instantly recognized?
Oh boy, that was an NBC creation. The animation from Hanna-Barbera. I think I instantly knew that Peter was going to be popular, so I asked them about the book rights, and I did a book with the company, Hanna-Barbera. I ultimately bought the Canadian rights to Peter Puck and eventually the worldwide rights to Peter Puck. But it's been a sad story because a lot of people have, I don't want to say ripped me off, but taken Peter and used him illegally to sell buttons and pins and pajamas and books and records and whatever. And no royalties ever flowed to us, except not even from the books, really. But this is a long story and a complicated one. All I know is that Peter in the Eaton Santa Claus parade was second in popularity to Santa Claus in 1 or 2 years. We should have done a lot better as business people, but thanks to Joan, we got as far as we did. I don't have any business acumen, and I wish I had, because I would have made Peter a star worldwide, overseas, Europe, Russia, wherever. And it may still happen, because there are entrepreneurs out there who can see the future for Peter. Too long-winded explaining all this, but he was a big part of our lives. A lot of fun, but a lot of misery as well. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, since you played Santa Claus, you actually finished 1-2 with Santa and Peter Puck. You finished 1-2, Brian.
Yeah, I can't think of any other characters I played except myself.
Well, I don't know. Who was this guy on the left?
Oh, my goodness. The past is haunting me. $25 to model a sweater. Do you want it or not? I said, I'll take it. We need to pay the rent. And that was the Beehive Company. I was in several commercials. And Eaton's catalog called me one day, or an agent, and said, show up at the studio. I showed up, and they threw a set of underwear at me. And there were 5 other guys all ready with some were in their underwear, some were getting in their underwear. And they said, there's a dressing room, here's your underwear. I threw it back. I said, I just got a job doing hockey on CBS. I'm out of the underwear modeling business, and walked out.
Well,
proudly.
You left that profession, and thanks to Joan, the world lost a great pots and pans salesman.
Yeah.
But your magazine column for your Scotiabank Hockey College was called Stick Handling Through Life. And Brian, you have not only written that, but you have showed us all how to live it. So you and Joan, thank you so much for the last hour and a half. It has been a tremendous pleasure. I can't thank you enough. And please, continued success. We are all better for having spent time with you, and we very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Glenn, for your questions. They were pertinent and right on, and I enjoyed answering them, and I enjoyed being with you tonight. I'll tell you that. The audience may be asleep, but we're both awake and appreciating each other, and I think that's a good thing.
Laura and Paul, do you want to come on before we say goodnight?
Yeah. Hi, Brian. For those that don't know, my mentor is Brian McFarlane.
That's right.
And he's the one that opened doors for me because he was so respected. He got me started on this career, and it's been a ride ever since. And I owe everything to Brian McFarlane, my good buddy.
Well, Paul, we go back a long way, and look what it's brought you. You're in company with Laurie and Glenn. You know,
well, it's real good company, yeah. And Glenn's coming to visit us in November, and we're looking forward to that too. So.
Oh, that's good. I hope I can be part of that.
Well, you're going to, if you can come to the show, we're going to have a hockey time machine there, and you can get to meet everybody that wants to meet you, which are a lot of people, actually.
Yeah, a lot of people with white canes.
I don't have a white cane. I want to see you.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
All right, Laura, you get the last words.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Brian and Joan. We love you both. We truly appreciate all the time that you give us, and the stories. We were laughing quite good today. And Joe Bowen wanted to say hello to you, Brian. He wasn't able to come on, but he said to make sure that that you got a big hello from him.
Well, if he just shouts it out his window, I'll hear him. And we're going to visit a friend who passed away together, and over in London in the next this month sometime. So Joe and I'll be together, and he'll be sharp as he always is.
Exactly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. If you like this program, could you do us a favor and click the button down below that says like?
I'll click it.
You'll click it? Perfect. So Brian McFarlane says to click the button to say like. And if you click the button to say subscribe and the little bell, it'll notify you every time we go live, which is usually every Thursday night. So thank you very much, everyone. Much appreciated.
Brian, if you can come on to the Zoom, Tim Ryan might be on there to say hello to you.
Oh, I'll wait, sure.
Yeah, so it's a different link. We'll send that to you, and people can ask you questions if you don't mind, and we'll just continue the discussion.
Okay.
Okay, but for us, for Hockey Time Machine, we'll say goodnight. Thanks for joining us.